2024, and the Summer Olympics are officially underway. We have plenty of events to watch, from diving, to equestrian, to flag football. Now, I know this has been on everyone's mind since the release, and I'm here to answer it. Which Elden Ring bosses would be the best Olympic athlete? Now, an Olympic athlete should have the following traits: work ethic, optimism, confidence, discipline, motivation, competitiveness, and I will also discuss what Olympic event they would compete in. Now, before we kick things off, this tier list will be divided into two parts, so look out for that second video. And secondly, we will be only going over the main game bosses. The Shadow of the Erdtree bosses will be in a separate video and tier list. And lastly, I'll be grouping similar bosses together just so we don't have to continually go over the same boss, or like a boss who's the same but now has a companion or something like that. Now, as always, let's hop right in and see who is an Olympic optimist and who is a lethargic lazybones. So let's kick things off with the tutorial boss that most players don't beat or actually are defeated by, the Grafted Scion. Now, as the adoptive child of Godric the Grafted, they have a multitude of limbs, a childish face, and the long flowing silver hair. Now, they are unrelenting with their attacks and seem to still display a calm and collective mind when taking damage. The Scion seems to be motivated and disciplined, but I'm not too sure if they would have a work ethic to compete in a sporting event. They would rather just patrol and maybe receive like an additional arm and leg later on. The Grafted Scion could compete in judo with their vast arrangement of hands and legs, in which they could obviously and very easily take down, just about anyone. Overall, I find the Grafted Scion to be pretty good overall. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start this tier list off. I'm going to place them into the A tier. So next up is the most legendary of legends, the Soldier of Godric. The soldier is just a remnant of the army who fled from the royal capital. So we know that the Soldier of Godric probably has lower confidence, optimism, and motivation. At least the soldier did follow Godric when they fled the city. So the soldier is disciplined. As for what Olympic event they would compete in, this common soldier has the two-handed greatsword. So I'm thinking that they would be pretty good in baseball, maybe just as like a designated hitter. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place the Soldier of Godric as an athlete into the D tier. So up next we have the first boss that lets players know Elden Ring is a FromSoftware game, the Tree Sentinel. Now, Tree Sentinels in general are living ramparts of the Erdtree, setting an example as to what defenders of the Erdtree should aspire to be. Now, they definitely have a competitive mindset and are quite motivated, as well as have a good work ethic since they work to defend all day, every day. Now, are they competitive? I think to some extent, but not too greatly. They just have that sweet Erdtree on their mind, again, all day, every day. For their event, I find that the Tree Sentinel will compete in equestrian or maybe pentathlon. Overall, I will say that the Tree Sentinel is a pretty good Olympic athlete, and therefore, I'm going to go ahead, I'm not going to place them all the way at the S tier, but I'm going to throw them into the A tier. Of course, with every FromSoftware game, there has to be some dragons, so let's talk about them. Of note, if there are any dragon types that do stand out from the normal grouping, I'll rank them later on in this video or the second video. Now let's talk about the normal dragons. So obviously they're going to be the ones that start the Olympic torch, but otherwise they seem like a pretty bad competitor. Their motivation is to do dragon things like burn and pillage, no discipline whatsoever, would just ignore any coaching advice, but they are territorial, so that indicates, I think, some level of competitiveness. Otherwise, that's all they really have. Now for the event, I'll just give them the event of rhythmic gymnastics, as they do have some sweet moves, and if they were to hold one of the ribbons in their mouth, I think they would be pretty cool to look at. Overall though, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place the average dragon in pretty low regard. I'm not going to put him all the way at the bottom in the F tier, but I am going to put him into the E tier. So up next we have the big stone cat that can levitate the Erdtree burial watch dog. Now, like the Tree Sentinels, they are defenders, but this time of burial sites. So they have some ethics, some discipline, and some form of motivation. But otherwise, that seems to be it. It's just one big magical stone cat. I think it would be one heck of a javelin thrower, though. All you have to do is just load one into its sword arm and watch that javelin fly. But overall, though, I think the Erdtree Burial Watchdog is capable in some categories and bad in others. So overall, I think that they're pretty mid-tier. I'm going to put them into the C tier. So now let's talk about the fellas with the whole hole who have taken a toll. the trolls. Now, their entire midriff is just gone due to them cutting some parts out when they betrayed the fire giants, so we automatically know that these particular trolls don't have the best loyalties. Now, the time that they've spent in wars and fighting and mining and stuff like that probably has worn down on their motivation, but I still see some pretty good potential here. The trolls with all their muscles and toned midsections need to be placed in something like the 102+ kilogram weightlifting competition. And with that, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna give the trolls the B tier, being some decent competition. So now we have the skeletal dogman, the beastman of Fair Missoula, or the armored version, or the skeletal version. Now, of note, the beastmen were granted an intelligence greater than that of humans, which in turn means that they would have some superior techniques to win some gold medals. The beastmen to me are capable warriors and defenders, and as such seem to have motivation since they still defend even though they're literally decomposing from prolonged wear and tear. They seem more than capable to do what needs to be done, even if they lose a little bit of an arm or like a little bit of leg muscle doing so. Due to the prolonged experience, I do not know if they would want to compete at the highest level just so they could preserve themselves a bit longer for something they deem more important. Now for the event, I still think they would attempt to try something more on the extreme side, like a triathlon. Overall, I think the Beastmen of Fair Missoula are pretty dang good. And so, again, due to their prolonged wear and tear, I'm not going to put them all the way at the top, but I am going to go ahead and put them into the A tier. So now we have the Demi-Human Chiefs, who are just gross, feral-like beings with the twin daggers who lead their gangs. Now, as representatives of the Demi-Human nation, I think that they would be ultra competitive, but it would be the like break the competitor's ankles type of competitiveness. They would have some decent work ethic, but definitely would not be disciplined due to their feral nature. As for the sport, I'm thinking something like karate, but they would just swing their arms and legs like the mad lads they are. There wouldn't be too much technique. Now overall, I think the Demi-Human Chiefs would have the mindset, but lack the discipline to really be a like quality Olympic athlete. So in the end, they would be pretty mid, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put them into the C tier. Now we have Elmer of the Brier, or the Bell-Bearing Hunter. Old Elmer was set for execution since he liked to acquire wandering merchants' bell bearings. So we know that Elmer would play dirty for sure, and would do stuff like take people's lacrosse sticks or like mountain bikes. Elmer has been betrayed by the Golden Order, so I do not think he would want to compete on a country or organization's behalf, but he did have the discipline and motivation to escape certain doom and is maybe competitive to some extent. I find that Elmer of the Brier needs to have a sword behind him, so of course he would be best suited for fencing. Overall though, I think that Elmer of the Brier, or the Bell-Bearing Hunter, is decent, but just not great. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place him into the B tier. The former gladiator Grawaren Dualist is next, who were traders of the Erd Tree. That just seems similar to the Bell-Bearing Hunter in that the Dualist may not particularly care to compete for the sake of an organization, but competes for his own glory and honor. So the Grawaren Dualist would be one of the best in terms of competitiveness, motivation, and optimism. They also seem pretty disciplined, for they are Grave Wardens watching over and protecting catacombs. All variants of the Duelist would compete in the throwing competitions of either shot put or discus. Overall, the Grave Warden Duelist is great except for the traitorous status, and therefore I'm not going to place them all the way at the top, but I am going to go ahead and throw them into the A tier. Moving on, we go to the Mad Pumpkinhead, who always makes me smile when they decide to slam their helmet into the ground. Now, like the Graveworn Duelist, the Mad Pumpkinhead too was a gladiator, but has lost their sanity along the way. The pumpkin helmet is literally used to calm themselves down, so when they are told they can't compete, expect them to throw a huge tantrum. I think that the Mad Pumpkinhead is one who would get disqualified for a multitude of reasons in whatever event they were told they were competing in. So of course I have an issue with them competing in the first place. They would just freak out at the first sign of competition and would destroy everything in their wake. Put them in literally any event you want and they will not come out with any medal whatsoever. So with that, we find the Mad Pumpkinhead to be the first to go all the way at the bottom and be placed into the F tier. Next up is one of the servants of Godfrey, the Crucible Knight. Now, the Crucible Knight and its variants is something to behold. They were claimed impure and unjust by the Golden Order as they were from the Great Tree and not the Erd Tree, but since the Crucible Knight is awesome and amazing, they mastered aspects of the Crucible incantations and now serve under Godfrey. The Crucible Knight is disciplined, driven, has the work ethic and athletic ability, and so much more. I think it would compete in just about any Olympic event too, but I think they would excel in judo like the Grafted Scion, especially with the seismic wave attack they do. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to give the Crucible Knight and other variants of it the honor of being first to go all the way at the top into the S tier. Now we have the boss, the Bloodhound Knight, which of note, I must say, they choose and stay loyal to a master until the very end. Leave their will out of this convo, this is just about the Bloodhound Knights in general. They're known to be persistent and quick hunters, so we know they have the drive and power to compete well as the discipline. I think they'd be good at something like flag football, using their swift abilities to be a decent elusive running back. Now, I do not find them to be quite perfect, as they do seem to be a little bit subservient and may lack a little bit of confidence. But overall, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place the Bloodhound Knight into the A tier. Next is the Knights Calvary, who just hunt down tarnished and fellow heroes. Now, the Knights Calvary is basically just some fellow henchmen serving the fell omen. Of course, loyalty is seen as good, but I mean, they only really come out during night, so they aren't particularly dedicated. So that's negatives on motivation and work ethic. For their event, I think that the Knights Calvary would do something like badminton due to their natural ability to hit things on the move so well. But overall, I find that the Knights Calvary is just kind of bland for the Olympics. So I'm going to put them again in the mid tier and throw them into the C tier. The Black Knife Assassins are up next, so I'm talking about like the Black Knife Assassin and the Black Knife Leader. Now the Black Knives all have the ability to take out demigods as they did on the Night of the Black Knives. So, I mean, there's some serious strength and stealth involved here. For an organization, they all seem to have the highest discipline and the highest motivation to do what needs to be done. Who ordered the Night of the Black Knives is still in the air. I mean, some speculate it's Ronnie, and we do not know what motivated them to do such a thing. So I do think there's some sort of compensation involved. I mean, like, what assassin works for free? So they may not have the purest motivational output and would compete only when compensated. I think the Black Knives would compete together as like a volleyball team and would dominate pretty well as long as they get whatever it is they want. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to follow up and place them into the A tier. Moving on, we come across one of the all-time most difficult FromSoftware bosses ever designed, the Tibia Mariner. They are leaders for those who live in death, skeletal beings who are produced due to the spread of Deathroot. Now, the Tibia Mariners are all slow and seemingly unmotivated and use their subordinates upon the tarnished and just teleport away. Now, Tibia Mariners may have some form of work ethic as they do lead, but otherwise they seem pretty crummy in every other aspect. Now, for the sport, it is going to be something obvious, rowing, of which their teammates would hate the overall speed that the Mariner is going. So I'm going to be nice, and I'm going to keep the Tibia Mariner out of the F tier and move them a tier above into the E tier. Moving on to the first big boss, we have the incognito version of Morgot, Marget the Fell Omen. Now, he does this alter ego to ensure others don't know of this omen curse that inflicts him. To me, this means that he would compete in the Olympics as himself with a fake mustache and glasses on to disguise himself, or maybe like the Batman cowl. Marget would compete while somewhat holding back, so people know that Marget is not near as cool or powerful as Morgot. So with that, the competitive fire and motivation wouldn't fully be there, but we all know he would still kick some major butt. Same with the optimism. He speaks so lowly about all around him that I'm sure he doesn't have too many kind words to say. Marget would compete in something solo, but it would be an event that doesn't stand out too much, like table tennis. But overall, with the lack of trying due to being Morgot's alter ego, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place Marget the Fell Omen into the B tier. Next is the Tree Bark Snake, the Ulcerated Tree Spirit. This one is going to be obvious due to the wake of destruction that these Puss Man rehashed bosses leave, so they would literally destroy the competition. Maybe, somehow, some way, they could compete in Equestrian, but as the horse itself. Now, I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to place the Ulcerated Tree Spirit all the way at the bottom into the F tier. The offspring of the twin bird are next, known as the Deathbird. Now, Deathbirds used to be firekeepers of Ghost Flame, which in turn brought out many vengeful spirits who were once incinerated in that flame. So they have that kind of malevolent mentality and would probably be a lawful evil on the alignment chart. So of course they do dirty deeds to win, but seems to be still disciplined to some extent. Would they care to win? I don't think so. They got better things to do. Give the Deathbird the sporting event of breaking and give them the D tier. Let's move on. Now is the big old stone golems, who are just dudes who wanted some employment and got some. Now, the golems come from who knows and are basically just employed to defend positions or locations, so there isn't too much of a drive nor any indication of optimism. but they would beat up the competition, I think, pretty well, and they do seem pretty disciplined. There's not too much more to say about the Golems, but throw them on a canoe sprint team. For their ranking, I think overall they're just pretty average, so of course that means I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place the Golems into the C tier. An all-time classic is up next. We have the legend himself, Patches. Now, Patches is someone that every FromSoftware game veteran would entrust their entire lives and solely possessions with. He's known for his honor and trustworthiness, so much so that he kicks us over and over again in each game to ensure we collect the treasures he found for us. In Elden Ring, he even stops the fight at half health because he cares for us enough to stop before he really hurts us. We can even summon him against Adon, who leaves a few seconds later probably to go, set up the post-boss fight festivities. Patches is who I trust to absolutely rob the competition of their medals. Literally. But seriously, Patches is a beloved character, but he has a heart as cold as Ronnie's body when she wants to become a doll. Patches is definitely javelin tossing material, but has morality issues while having the drive. So with that being said, I'm going to place Patches, the always trustworthy, into the B tier. Up next would 1000% be the official Olympic flame lighter. We have good old Godric the Grafted. Now, Godric is an ultra competitor and does just about anything in his power to win, but on the other side, he is the world's worst sportsman and would try to claim some appendages from fellow competitors if he were to beat them before the competition, like Nancy Kerrigan. So Godric would be a winner, but he would have to get performance-enhancing drug tested after, and the competition would have to be checked for injuries. Godric seems like a badminton kind of guy, and would graft a giant racket to ensure the gold medal. Overall, due to the extreme measures he would take to win unfairly, Godric the Grafted is going to go into the B tier. Following Godric is the big bear with the linebacker shoulders, the Rune Bear. Just think of a roided brown bear that got a cool tattoo on his chest and took some drugs. Now think of said bear in the Olympics. You know where I'm going to be going with this. F tier. Now we have the Misbegotten fellows like Scaly and Leonine. So basically, the Misbegotten are treated as slaves and such as they came in contact with the Crucible. They have aspects of different animals mushed into one being, such as horns, scales, wings, and such. So that is great for the physical aspect, and I do find the Misbegotten to be competitive, but are still at least to some degree feral and ravenous. They would compete at least to some extent, but there is a fair chance that someone next to them will have to be removed from competition due to injury. The Misbegotten could compete in something like the triple jump due to their love to leap around. Overall though, I think that the Misbegotten are dangerously close to making it at the bottom, but I'll be nice and I'll keep them out of that and place them into the E tier. Just make sure and don't take your eyes off them ever. So now we have the glitchy looking shadowy figure known as the Cemetery Shade. Now the Cemetery Shade is basically just a body taken over by a mantis, aka a big old bug. The Cemetery Shade is just a zombie-like creature that moves around like it has ultra instinct and is a walking glass cannon. It doesn't seem to care about anything at all, but still has a tiny bit of competitive fire since it does at least fight to survive. I think the Cemetery Shade, although a glass cannon, would be best placed in boxing, being able to dodge so well, but I'm going to follow up and also place the Cemetery Shade into the E tier. So now we have the Frosty Ancient Hero Zamor, a particularly useful entity to Godfrey in the war against the giants. Tall, sleek, and slender, this ancient hero somehow managed to get imprisoned in the Everjail. For that, the ancient hero is probably bored as can be, just like any other entity trapped, so I'm sure playing in the Olympics would be a very welcomed change of pace. Now, the Ancient Hero is morally ambiguous, as they are labeled as a hero, but is labeled as such most likely by Godfrey. So there's some questions about the discipline and motivational aspects, but overall they seem to be pretty decent. I think the Ancient Hero could pull off some cool artistic swimming, showing off their sweet moves. And overall, I think the Ancient Hero Zamor would be alright as an athlete, and with that, we're going to go ahead and place them into the B tier. So now we have the rehashed Asylum Demon from Dark Souls 1, the Erdtree avatar. Who can forget having this foe over and over with some slight variations in between? Now, the Erdtree avatars have a singular task of protecting minor Erdtrees throughout the lands between, and that's it. Don't attempt to move them in any way, shape, or form, or you'll be met with some very flashy, shiny attacks from the big old chunky tree stump. Maybe you could somehow build an arena around a minor Erdtree, and then the Erdtree avatar could be like a spectator while still protecting it. But I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna have to place the Erdtree avatar all the way at the bottom into the F tier. Following up from one plant creature to another, we have Miranda the Blighted Bloom, which is just a giant poisonous flower. If you can find any form or fashion this flower can compete, put it down in the comments below. But otherwise, Miranda will be placed also all the way at the bottom into the F tier. Sorry for all the botanists watching this video. Next up is the Cleanrot Knights, who are warriors who vowed to fight alongside Millennia even as their skin and flesh became putrefied. They still even carry a winged sword insignia to show that they're still devoted, which I think speaks volumes about their discipline and motivation. Even as their bodies become more and more corrupt, they carry on. I mean, come on, that just sounds like amazing all around. That's the drive an Olympic athlete needs to be the next Michael Phelps or something. Given their circumstances, I think that Cleanrot Knights would be a master of combat, so I think they would excel in something like Taekwondo. Overall, Cleanrot Knights seem to be fantastic as an athlete and would represent the country of Millennia proudly and give her all the gold medals she desires. So I'll place the Cleanrot Knights all the way into the tip top, into the S tier. Let's move on to another Everjail prisoner, Adon, Thief of Fire. Now, Adon's imprisonment came from him stealing the Flame of the Fell God incantation, which launches one cool big fireball very slowly and very menacingly. I mean, that's about it for the lore aspect. Otherwise, he's just a normal dude wearing fire prelate armor. He seems just average in all aspects and is just serving a sentence for taking an incantation. Put him in a semi-dumb and semi-interesting competition like Trampoline and put him in the middle of the pack into the C tier. Now we have the Crystallians, who are there to just defend their crystals due to the wisdom of the stone. Big and blue, these fellows don't seem to really do much at all for competition, even though they would probably perform well in certain events due to their dense weight. The Crystallians just do not seem to have much, but don't seem horrible enough to make it all the way into the bottom. So I'll give them the event of wrestling sheerly due to their weight, and I'm gonna go ahead and keep them out of the F tier and place them into the E tier. We move on to a boss that I personally got agitated with due to them moving everywhere. We have the Red Wolves. Now note that the Red Wolves know sorceries, so it is quite an intelligent being with some form of perseverance. I find that the Red Wolves are loyal beasts and do have a good work ethic. They seem to be disciplined to learn those stupid sword sorceries and like laser beams, and seem to be competitive in nature. My only question mark is that they are disciplined and motivated enough to compete to the highest level, but would they do it without being dirty? With that being said, I could see the Red Wolves performing in something like pole vault, using its mouth to hold the pole as it smokes the competition because it jumps so high to begin with. Overall, I will place them a tier below the S tier, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place the Red Wolves into the A tier. Next, we have another great Rune Bear, Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, who has basically just gone insane for being trapped in a grand library and has become obsessed with reincarnation. I mean, she does hover in the air during the first phase, so there has to be some usage of that, but for the criteria set out in the beginning of the video, I just find that she is too far gone to really perform any athletic feat at the Olympics or would care to do so. She just wants to have a protective barrier around her, reincarnate those poor juvenile scholars, and clutch her amber egg. Maybe Renala could excel at high jump, just hovering over the pole each and every time it is raised, but I really do not see any potential here and do not think she would want to do any of that. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, all the way at the bottom into the F tier. We move on to the Alabaster and Onyx Lords, who are aliens who crashed down from meteorites and were immediately worshipped and even taught Radon. They're masters of gravity magic and have stone swords and run around in a loincloth while displaying their absolute dominance like Chads. Now these lords are destructive, yes, but since they have students and worshippers, they at least know when to hold back and become teachers. To me, that means they're disciplined and are fantastic teachers, since Radon learned gravity magic well under their guidance. They're optimistic and have a work ethic to teach due to this, and I think they still have that competitive fire as they did catch the attention of the Lords of the Lands Between. With the gravity manipulation, I think they could easily snag a gold medal in just about any event, but I'm going to go ahead and choose tennis, manipulating the ball subtly enough for no one to notice. I'm going to go ahead and place the Alabaster and Onyx Lords all the way at the top and place them into the S tier. I think they could do that pretty dang well. So now we have the Grafted Scions, distant spider cousin, the Royal Revenant, Just think of the Grafted Scion, but instead teleports and hates on all shield users. I mean, the Royal Revenant at his core is just some abomination who fights everything, but at least they have that fire in them, and you might, although very unlikely, get away with them competing and not going after someone. I think it would be interesting to see the Royal Revenant compete in the 100-meter dash and just, like, teleport to the end before anyone else. But overall, I'm not very convinced that the Royal Revenant is someone that I would want to compete in the Olympics. So I'm going to keep them out of the F tier and put them into the E tier. So now we have the Royal Knight Loretta, a sympathizer for the Albinaurics who lead them to what she thought is a haven for them. Loretta is one of the Elden Ring bosses that actually shows some form of sympathy to others. So automatically we know that she has the discipline to play fair and the motivation to try her best for the sake of the competitors. Loretta also has the optimism as displayed by her attempt to find a better place for others and the work ethic to do so in the first place. Loretta's obvious event would be archery due to the bow skills she has. I think that Loretta should be placed at the tip top and would take home a gold medal for all those ETs who are treated like dirt. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place her all the way at the top into the S tier. So now we have what I think is a hilarious boss to fight, the Spirit Caller Snail. I mean, this Snail is just a stand user with their stand being a Crucible Knight, who I ranked all the way into the S tier earlier. Now, the main question is, what is the range that a spirit can be placed away from the Caller, and if the Snail could somehow hide in the audience while the Crusader Knight competes in its stead? If so, we have another S tier, plain and simple. But with the added risk, I'm gonna knock the Snail down a tier into the A tier. It could, if it can hide well, compete in anything a normal Crusader Knight can. Next is the boss, who obviously has a love and kindness for all the omens out there, with the cutesy name of Omen Killer. They're kind enough to wear masks of evil spirits that omens see in their nightmares, so we know that Omen Killers are the ones to try and instill fear and intimidate their opponents. I think that Omen Killers are big beasts who are ready to do whatever it takes, but at the cost of playing dirty and mean. Would they go to the extreme of cheating though? I don't necessarily think that, but I don't think that the morality is perfect either. I mean, the original Omen Killer did drink a flask that removed all emotions so they would not feel remorse or compassion. With their size, I think that Omen Killers would be great though as rugby players. And with that, I'll go ahead and place the Omen Killer a little bit lower on this tier list and place them into the D tier. So now, as stated earlier, we have a slight variation of the dragons where we have the Glenstone Dragons, who I will immediately just say this. Take the normal dragons ranking and put the Glenstone Dragons a tier above because they have magic. So give the Glenstone Dragons the same event of rhythmic gymnastics, and we're going to go ahead and put them into the D tier. Easy as can be. Let's move on. So to end part 1 of this tier list, we now have the more hefty of the two skin wearers, the Godkin Noble. Now, the Noble was once a servant of the Gloam-eyed Queen, who was defeated and her skin made into a few pieces of outerwear. For the Noble, who is a bit plumper, I do question a bit of the work ethic put in their everyday lives. I think that they may be a bit more slow and lethargic and do not have too much of a competitive fire. The Godkin Noble is a big brute that I question in most categories. With the rapier in hand, the Godkin Noble would perform excellent in the fencing competition. And overall, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place them into the E tier. Maybe the Noble can use their role to perform in some track events. I don't know. So that's the end of part 1 for this video. We now have a general grasp of what bosses would be alright and would be terrible in the Olympic competition. So tune in later where we will see where more in-game bosses rank in this tier list in part 2. But for now, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, adios.